The forest, and there, curled against the carbon-dark roots, slept a wolf. His fur, once thick and silver, had dulled into a muted gray layered with ash and dirt. Scars crossed his flank in narrow lines, the kind that came from battles against teeth and claws, rather than human metal. His name was Rail, not given by humans, but by the life he'd lived, by the paths he'd carved through the valley's forests, by the legacy woven into him by generations of wolves long gone. He slept deeply, the kind of sleep earned only after days of restless travel and nights spent listening for threats that never truly vanished. His breath rose and fell in slow, heavy pulls, fogging the cold air with each exhale. The silence around him was thick, too thick. Not the natural quiet of dawn when birds had not yet found their voices. Not the peaceful pause before the day's first squirrel scurried from its nest. This was a silence born of absence, an old, heavy quiet that settled like a weight on the shoulders of every living thing that dared cross the fire-scarred ground. The forest, too tired from the long trek that had brought him back here, back to the heart of the valley, back to the remnants of the fire, back to the burned tree that marked the boundary of everything he had once known. The crow croaked again, more sharply this time, as if issuing a warning. Something rustled in the underbrush. Rail's eyes snapped open instantly. Gold, sharp, alert, cutting through the dawn. His muscles tensed as he lifted his head, nostrils flaring. No fear, just readiness. The rustle grew louder. A deer, lean and young, stepped into the clearing. She froze. He stood slowly, stretching his limbs one by one, shaking loose small flakes of soot from his coat. When he stepped away from the burned tree, the ground crunched faintly beneath his paws. Not with frost, though the air held the bite of approaching winter, but with old charcoal that had seeped deep into the soil. He sniffed the ground. Ash. And beneath it, something else, something older than fire. A scent carried upward from the roots, faint but persistent. Wolf. Not recent, not familiar, but wolf nonetheless. Rail's chest tightened. He remembered the fire, how it had swept through this patch of forest seasons ago, wild and uncontained. He remembered the smoke, the heat, the panic in the pack as they scattered to survive. He remembered who didn't survive. The burned tree had become a grave marker of sorts, unintentional but deeply symbolic, a boundary line between what had been lost and what remained. Rail circled the tree slowly, every movement deliberate. The forest watched him, not with eyes, but with a kind of quiet awareness that pulsed gently in the roots and branches. This place had once echoed with wolf voices, with the thrum of paws chasing deer and the rising howl that stitched the night sky together. But the fire had silenced all of it. The valley had carried on. Trees regrew, rivers ran steadily, birds returned. But the wolves had not. Not fully. Rail paused, nose pressed to the ground where the faint old scent lingered. It tugged at something buried deep inside him, a memory of a packmate long gone, of a howl carried on wind, of a presence he'd once trusted with his life. But the scent was too faint to unravel. The forest had chosen to forget, chosen to bury memories beneath ash and soil, until nothing remained but vague impressions and ghosts of scent. Rail lifted his head. The breeze shifted. A new smell drifted through the clearing, fresh, sharp, distinctly human. His fur bristled immediately. Humans rarely ventured this deep into the forest at dawn. And when they did not come quietly. Rail moved away from the burned tree and melted into the ferns at the clearing's edge, his body low, his breath steady. He scanned the trees through narrow eyes, watching for movement. Footsteps, careful, slow, too deliberate to belong to someone unfamiliar with the woods. Whoever approached knew how to walk softly among branches and roots. A hunter, perhaps, or someone worse. Rail's ears twitched. A twig snapped lightly. Then a breath, human, controlled, nearby. Rail slipped deeper into the ferns. The burned tree cast behind him like a black sentinel watching silently. The forest held its breath again. And the wolf, hidden among the shadows and soot, prepared himself, because the valley had forgotten what happened here, but Rail had not. And whatever moved toward him through the trees carried the scent of something the forest feared to remember. Rail stayed absolutely still, his body flattened into the damp earth beneath the tall ferns. Even his breath slowed until it blended with the faint stirrings of morning wind. The scent of the approaching human was stronger now, close enough that Rail could separate its layers. Pine resin clung to the man's clothing, mixed with the sharp tang of metal and the muted warmth of old leather. Beneath it all was something else, exhaustion, not fear, not haste, just the quiet, steady weariness of someone who had walked far and long. The footsteps came into view before the man did, boots pressing down on the blackened ground near the burned clearing. The ash-muffled sound, but Rail felt each step in the faint tremor of soil beneath his paws. The ferns trembled as the man finally emerged from between the trees. He was older than Rail expected, not old in body, but worn, his lined face half hidden beneath a dark beanie pulled low. His jacket was heavy and weatherproof, the kind worn by rangers or hikers who knew the land well. He carried a small pack, strapped tightly across his shoulders, and in one hand he held a walking stick, polished smooth by years of use. The man stopped at the edge of the burned clearing and stared at the blackened tree with a long, heavy stillness. Not curiosity, recognition. Rail watched his jaw clench as the man stepped closer, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ash. He brushed his fingers along the charred bark of the trunk as though touching something sacred or painful. His voice, when he spoke, was low and rough, barely above a whisper. "You're still here." Rail stiffened. The man wasn't talking to him. He was talking to the tree, or rather, to whatever memory the tree represented. The wolf didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, the quiet heaviness of someone standing at a grave no one else remembered. The forest shifted slightly around them, a soft breeze pushing through the branches. The man took a slow breath, then knelt by the base of the tree. He sifted the ash between his fingers, watching the gray dust fall back to the earth. Rail's ears twitched. The ash carried faint traces of something he recognized. Sorrow, old and dried into the soil like marrow and bone. The man remained kneeling, pressing his fingers into the earth as though searching for something buried beneath. But after several minutes, he exhaled deeply and rose to his feet. "Nothing left," he muttered. Rail felt the words rather than understood them. The man took a few steps around the tree, scanning the clearing. His boots left shallow impressions in the ash, disturbing the silence that had lain untouched all morning. Then he stopped suddenly. His head turned sharply, toward the ferns where Rail was hidden. The wolf froze, muscles tight. Had the man heard him? Seen him? Smelled him? Rail's fur bristled as the man took one slow step in his direction. Then another. He lifted the walking stick slightly, not aggressively, but cautiously, the way humans did when they sensed an animal nearby, but didn't yet know what it was. Rail inched backward, deeper into the shadows, but his paw brushed a dry branch hidden beneath leaves. The snap echoed through the clearing like a gunshot. Instantly, the man stiffened. His breath caught in his throat. The walking stick shifted in his grip, not raised for attack, but for readiness. "Easy," he murmured, stepping slowly toward the ferns. "I'm not here to hurt you." Rail's body tightened further. Human words meant nothing to him, but tone meant everything. And this man's tone carried uncertainty, tinged with something like sympathy, not threat. But Rail remained still, concealed by the ferns. The man stopped a few paces away, squinting into the shadows. "Wolf?" he asked quietly. Rail's ears twitched again. The man let out a long breath that shook slightly. "If you're here," he swallowed, "then maybe it wasn't all lost." Rail blinked. The man was mourning something, some memory bound to this burned clearing. And the wolf, though he did not grasp the depth of human grief, sensed the weight of it pressing down upon the forest floor. But something else tugged Rail's attention. A faint sound, barely audible even to his sharp ears, rustled far behind the man, deeper in the woods. Not human, not light-footed like deer. Heavy, methodical. a presence moving with the kind of confidence that belonged only to apex predators or creatures that believed nothing in the forest could challenge them. Rail inhaled deeply. His nostrils flared. Another scent drifted toward him, threading beneath the man's, colder, sharper, carrying the memory of danger. A predator, but not one Rail recognized. His fur rose. The human sensed something too. He lifted his head slowly, eyes narrowing as he turned toward the sound. "What was that?" he murmured. The forest answered with silence, thick, heavy, waiting. Rail stepped out of the ferns without thinking, instinct overriding caution. His paws pressed softly into the ash, and he emerged into the clearing, golden eyes fixed on the trees behind the man. The human jerked slightly at the sudden appearance, but didn't raise the walking stick. Instead, he stared, stunned, at the wolf standing only a few strides away. Rail didn't look at him. His gaze stayed locked on the tree line. The man followed his stare, the recognition of danger slowly dawning across his face. "Something else is out there," he whispered. Rail lowered his head, ears pinned forward, stance ready. The man gripped his walking stick, breathing quickening, but not out of fear of the wolf. Fear of whatever had drawn the wolf into the open. A branch snapped deep in the trees. The sound rolled across the forest floor like a warning. The man's voice trembled. "You hear it too." Rail didn't move. He didn't blink. The forest around them grew unnaturally still once more, as if the land itself held its breath. The burned tree loomed behind them like a charred sentinel watching over the moment. And together, man and wolf, they waited, staring into the shadows, where something moved, unseen, but undeniably present. Something the forest wanted desperately to forget, but something that had not forgotten them. The forest did not move. Not even the wind dared to stir the branches above the burned clearing, as Rail and the man stood side by side, both staring into the thicket where the sound had come from. The wolf's body was rigid, muscles drawn tight beneath his fur, ears angled forward in a perfect line of focus. The man, still gripping his walking stick, did not breathe for several seconds, as though even the faint pull of oxygen might betray his presence. A second sound slithered through the trees, softer this time, but unmistakable. A slow, heavy shift of weight. Rail's eyes narrowed. He knew the rhythms of the valley's predators: bear, cougar, even the occasional stray dog or coyote. But this was none of them. The scent in the air carried none of the familiar signatures, none of the earthy musk or canine tang or feline sharpness. This scent was colder, cleaner somehow, touched by metal. Rail took one step forward, paws sinking into the ash. The man glanced at him, confusion flickering across his face. "You're warning me," he whispered, the realization settling slowly into his voice. The forest answered with another crack, a branch snapping under deliberate pressure, not the careless break of wind or passing deer. Rail lifted his muzzle, scenting. The metallic trace grew sharper, closer. The man swallowed and lifted his walking stick higher, though he clearly knew it would do little against something capable of making a wolf stand guard. The shadow emerged without hurry, stepping between two narrow trunks. At first it was only a shape, blunt-edged, broad-shouldered, too tall for a dog, too heavy for a coyote. The man's breath hitched. Rail did not move. The figure paused in the half-light beneath the crowns of the pines, hidden enough that details remained blurred. But Rail could see the glint of eyes, pale and watchful, catching the weak sunlight like shards of broken glass. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the creature stepped fully into the clearing. It was a wolf. Or it might once have been. Its fur was patchy in places, scarred in others, mottled with soot and soil. It was larger than Rail by half a head, heavier in the shoulders, its stance rigid and unnatural. But what froze Rail wasn't its size. It was the smell, wrong, sharp, threaded with something foreign, something that had no place in the valley. The man tightened his grip, his voice barely a breath. "That isn't normal." The wolf creature, for it did not move like a healthy pack animal, lowered its head slightly but kept its gaze locked on Rail, not the human. Its lips lifted just enough to show a hint of teeth, not a snarl, more like a statement, a claim. Rail responded by lowering his own head, angling his body to the side in a way that signaled both readiness and defiance. He did not back down. The burned clearing, the ash-soaked soil. This place was tied to him far deeper than scent or memory. The stranger wolf stepped forward, its paws crushing soft charcoal into dust. Rail stiffened, ready to spring, but the creature stopped again, studying him. And then, Rail understood. The scent beneath the metallic tang wasn't just unfamiliar. It was layered, faintly touched by smoke and old fire. Something inside the wolf creature had lived through a blaze, the same blaze that scarred the clearing, but its survival had twisted something in it. The man exhaled shakily as realization settled on him too. You were part of the pack, he whispered, staring at the scarred newcomer. You were here when it happened. His voice faltered. The shadow wolf twitched, almost flinching at the man's tone, as though the words brushed against some buried memory it didn't want to face. But its eyes never left Rail. A low sound rumbled in the wolf's throat. A warning. Rail's hackles rose. He took a slow step backward, not out of fear but strategy. He needed space. The man glanced between them, panic tightening his face. Hey, easy, he whispered, though his voice was pointless to both. The shadow wolf took another step forward, not fast, not aggressive, but with purpose. Its fur bristled. Something ancient and dangerous passed between the two wolves, a recognition twisted by fire and time. Rail held the stare. The forest held its breath, and then, without warning, the shadow wolf lunged. The man cried out. Rail leapt sideways, barely avoiding the creature's jaws. Ash exploded beneath them as Paws scraped the earth. The two wolves circled, bodies tense, movements silent except for their breathing. The man backed away toward the burned tree, walking stick shaking in his hands. Stop, he shouted, knowing full well neither would obey. The shadow wolf charged again, teeth flashing. Rail twisted, snapping sharply at its shoulder, grazing fur but not flesh. The creature retaliated instantly with a swipe of its forepaw that ripped a line of ash into the ground where Rail had stood a moment before. They were fast, too fast for the man's eyes to follow clearly, but Rail saw everything. The creature wasn't fighting to kill. Not yet. It was testing him, asserting dominance, claiming territory. Rail had no intention of surrendering. The burned tree loomed behind the man like a silent judge as the wolves clashed once more. Rail pushed forward this time, driving the creature back a step, then two. His jaws snapped inches from its throat, a warning deeper than words. The shadow wolf froze. The man held his breath, For a heartbeat, the two wolves stood immobile, breath steaming in the cool air, bodies rigid as stone. Then, the shadow wolf backed away. One step, another. Its gaze flicked toward Rail with something like fury and something like grief before it turned and melted into the tree line, disappearing as silently as it had appeared. Rail remained rigid long after the creature vanished, ears pricked, chest rising and falling in deep, controlled breaths. The man sagged against the burned tree, gasping. What was that? He whispered. Rail did not answer. Could not answer. Instead, he looked toward the forest, where the shadow wolf had disappeared. The scent still lingered, heavy with the memory of fire. And in that moment, Rail knew the truth with cold certainty. The forest had chosen to forget the fire. But not everything burned was willing to be forgotten.